is Hans Koekoek. Ik ben van Fellow Digitals. And as our next guest doesn't speak any Dutch, I'll continue in English. Thanks, by the way, Assad, for the clear explanation on the BMM tool. And I know it's always a challenge to see whether everything is going to work as planned. I believe the same goes for digitalization. We do our best to understand what is going on, how we deal with rapid changes, and that's not always easy. We've seen Corona that has accelerated this digital transformation we're talking about. It's having an increasing impact on the way we work and we do business. People stay at home and suddenly we're confronted with a hybrid way of working. So private life and work life are getting mixed up. As fellow digitals, we're very familiar with these issues. Over the last 20 years, we've been helping companies throughout Europe to deal with this. Create value, obviously, for companies, and both for companies and for individual employees. We developed solutions for modern day working life, for remote working and remote learning, for people to stay connected with each other, to communicate in a proper and efficient way, to share knowledge with each other, and to learn and to collaborate together. I believe approximately about 350,000 people work every day on our platforms as of today. Okay, about tonight. Although we're still fairly new in Switzerland, we still already have quite some customers here, but our ambition actually is to help Swiss businesses to take the next step into the digital transformation process. Well, in doing so, our first step is joining the Dutch Business Roundtable. So it's a great pleasure to be here. And for now online, obviously, I hope to see you soon in real life. Well, so much for the Fellow Digitals pitch. Let's move on to our first keynote guest, Kamales Lardi. She originates, as Agneta already said, from Malaysia, but has lived and worked now for about 20 years in Switzerland. Kamales is a world-renowned expert in business transformation, and as said, a top 10 global influencer in this field. She's also a teaching fellow and chairperson at the MBA Advisory Board in Durham University, and was recently appointed, correct me if I'm wrong, Kamales, you can say that later, as a chair of the Forbes Business Council. Kamales established her company, which is called Lardi Partner Consulting, in 2012, I think, in Lachen, which is pretty close to Zurich, I understand. And she has advised companies throughout Europe and Asia and Africa ever since. Kamales often says technology is not a silver bullet approach. It's a clear value proposition that should drive any transformation effort. And I think this approach resonates very well with many business leaders and has helped her stand out in the digital space. Okay, well, today Kamales will help us understand, hopefully, a little bit more about what this digital transformation is actually all about and how we can address these new challenges. So I'm very pleased and honored that she is our first keynote speaker of the night. Ladies and gentlemen, Ms. Kamales Lardi.
Thank you very much, Hans. I'm just going to share my presentation. Let me know if you're not able to see it. Otherwise, I will jump right into it. It's wonderful to be with you here today, and I'm very honored to be invited to speak to the Dutch Business Roundtable. So I hope that you enjoy the presentation. I'm going to start by just saying digital transformation is not just about acquisition and implementation of technology. A core element for digital transformation and for any business transformation is really the human element. And that can mean breaking or making the success of the project, basically. And over the last 21 years, I've worked with companies across various regions as well as across various industries. And the one thing that I've learned across the board with all of these implementations as I advise businesses is the fact that transformation success really lies or really depends on being able to shift beliefs and to drive new behaviors within an organization. And so today what I'm going to do is cover some of these elements, really first talking about setting the scene around what is digital transformation, what has shifted in the global business landscape, why transformation is a big topic for organizations, especially over the last 1 year. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about how we approach digital business transformation when we address companies, and then finally address the human side of transformation and what are some of the approaches or models that we use for that. So let's first take a step back and look at the global business landscape. Over the last decade or so, what we have seen is disruption hit the global business landscape, and the traditional rules and assumptions within which businesses used to operate are no longer valid. So the time-tested rules and assumptions around how you identify customers and how you engage with them, how you develop products and services and promote them in your market, as well as how you manage your organization and manage the people within the organization, all of these rules are completely disrupted now. And emerging technologies have played a key role in upending some of these rules. And what we've seen as well is organizations and businesses that have been able to leverage digital technologies and online platforms have really been able to displace traditional business models. So if we really look at one element, for example, how companies access the market. Today, a company, a new company, a startup, whatever size, whatever industry you're in, on day one, these companies will get access to a global marketplace by utilizing digital channels and online platforms. So they can actually, on day one, gain access to a global marketplace, whereas traditionally organizations tended to depend on the physical environment they were in, the physical location where their businesses were at, or the interactions, the physical interactions that they had with their customer base. And we're seeing this reflected in the market valuation of companies. So if you take a traditional organization or a company like Starbucks or Nike, they took about 24 years to reach a $1 billion valuation in the market. A luxury goods company like Prada took about 98 years to reach $1 billion valuation. Whereas what we're seeing with the new business models that leverage digital technologies like Twitter and Instagram and YouTube, these companies took between 1 to 3 years to actually gain that same $1 billion valuation. So what we're seeing is the scalability and the growth of these companies are significantly accelerated due to the access to digital technologies. This applies as well to the competitive landscape. These new business models, these new companies are becoming real valid competitive competitors to traditional businesses as well. Whereas in the past, companies used to look at peers within their own industry, larger organizations within their own industry as competitors. And the traditional boundaries of industries and markets are also being disrupted. If you ask a company like Amazon, for example, what is your business or what is your industry base, they would probably find that very difficult to answer, because Amazon is not only in consumer retail, but they've gone into consumer healthcare, they've gone into media streaming and content sharing. They've also gone into financial services and so on. So these new businesses, these new business models are disrupting the traditional industry boundaries as well. So what we're seeing is companies being able to gain access to a global marketplace anywhere, anytime. And a lot of this has been due to the emerging technologies that have triggered shifts in the global business landscape. And these new technologies are developing at such an accelerated pace that it's almost difficult to keep up. We see new breakthrough technologies coming out on a daily basis. Whereas in the past, what we used to see were technologies, one type of technology or another being developed and accelerating. Now we're seeing multiple categories of technologies developing at such a rapid pace. A lot of these developments are really due to having the right foundation elements in place today. So if we think about unparalleled processing power, unprecedented storage capacity, and having just global accessibility and connectivity, as well as the reduction in the price to produce these technologies. All of these elements really converging to create a foundation that is just ripe for these technologies to accelerate and grow. An example of this would be artificial intelligence. Research and development in artificial intelligence has really existed since the 70s. But over the last decade or so, we've seen all of these elements come into play and accelerate development in artificial intelligence. And we are now seeing new technology solutions within the AI space developing, adoption and application within business as well as in our lives in general, just accelerating to a point where AI is almost in everything that we are using today, in every type of technology. And the combination of technologies as well are producing new results. For example, combining blockchain and AI to produce new transformative solutions that can disrupt industries. So we're seeing all of these developments coming into play and disrupting industries. And companies that are able to leverage on this price performance advantage, this doubling of price performance of computation and the information flow properties that exist within these technology solutions, they're able to disrupt the industries that they're in. So let's take a solution that demonstrates how this works. The basic solution of an analog camera. And traditionally, the analog camera functioned within a scarcity space. And when I say scarcity, I mean that there are limitations within which you can use the camera. Limited number of clicks, limitations in terms of the number of photos you can take, as well as the limitations in terms of cost, the cost of the camera and the cost of the film that you're developing. And once we hit the digitization of that product, so we have the digital camera that have come into the market, it was able to basically disrupt the entire market and shift the photography industry towards an abundance model, away from scarcity into an abundance model. So what does that mean? You have now a digital product that's allowing you to take unlimited pictures, as many as you like. And the price as well, there's no cost related to the number of photos you can take because you don't have a limitation in terms of the film. And that's disrupted the traditional analog business environment of photography as well. And we went into a stage of demonetization as well. So demonetization referring to the fact that you don't need to now own a camera because there's a camera in every single smartphone that you purchase in the market today. So it puts this product, it puts this capability into the hands of every smartphone owner. And that creates a democratized environment where anyone can become a photographer, anyone can take pictures, and anyone can put them on digital platforms such as Pinterest or Instagram and eventually monetize off of those pictures. And we are seeing this happen with people who have created Instagram profiles and positioned themselves as digital photographers. And so we are also shifting then the problem space away from physical products, away from physical capabilities into a digital environment that creates abundance. Now, this is a very interesting aspect, but technology alone is not a trigger. Technology has actually triggered a change in consumer behavior. So people have changed the way they behave, and this has changed the expectations towards companies and brands as well. As we adopt technology as quickly as we can adopt technology, we are also starting to expect this hyper-personalized engagement with the brands, this frictionless, seamless engagement across different channels. The predictive elements of products and services, such as with Netflix, where Netflix recommends to the users programs that they might like, shows they might like, based on the preferences and based on past behavior. And as well, the flexibility, the ability to be able to engage with products and services on a much deeper level, anytime, anywhere, across the globe. And so we're seeing consumer behaviors being shifted as well based on the technology capabilities that are now available to them. And they're demanding this change from any brand that they're interacting with online. Now, what we saw over the last 1 year has been a significant shift. We saw the global internet accessibility, or the number of internet users, hit 4.66 billion globally. And this was a 316 million growth from the year before. And so this was a massive number of people who've just shifted onto using technology, using online services a lot more. And this was because of the pandemic environment where people shifted into lockdowns and social distancing and so on. So that was quite understandable. But what was quite fascinating was, out of these 4.66 billion people who are now using the internet, they spend 42% of their waking time on average using the internet, using services on the internet. That's a massive amount of time. That's more than half your life, or less, almost half your life, being spent online with online services. So this significant shift has actually driven quite a lot of changes for organizations. It's created a new next normal environment. Shift in consumer demands, for example, people have started to purchase more online, use more online channels for acquisition, such as for groceries, which was not a big item. So people shifted away from non-essential purchases to essential purchases as well. There was a significant amount of brand switching. So as you were not able to gain access to your traditional preferred brands because of the lockdown situation, people started to expose themselves to new brands and try new types of products and services. And so this switching happened away from preferred brands towards new products. And of course, hyper-localization. We saw supply chains globally being disrupted. And this caused basically companies to start partnering with local providers, as well as local last mile delivery companies, in order to ensure products and services reach the companies. And a lot of these has actually related to the connectivity or the connectedness of consumers online, and prioritization of hygiene and safety, which was not an issue before the pandemic. And never in the history of our modern times have we seen the massive number of people go into a remote or work from home environment. So this has happened over the last 1 year. And that's forced companies to reskill and upskill their workforce and implement collaborative technologies to enable their employees to continue being productive and to continue business within their environment. So we've seen a lot of shifts and business pivots as well. But one of the biggest things, the biggest elements that I found impacting this businesses over the last 1 year has been this mindset shift. Previously, we had many times discussions with leadership teams, with companies around what is the role of digital within their organization? How can you, or how do you position digital transformation, convincing leadership teams that this is something they need to look at? And this mindset shift has now occurred naturally over the last 1 year. It's no longer a nice to have, it's a must have. And it's a question about now, how do we implement it? So we've seen companies over the last 1 year implement digital solutions, mainly focusing on enabling work from home, enabling business continuity, data analytics, as well as digital solutions to enable acquisition and engagement with their customers. But a lot of that was knee-jerk reactions, trying to very quickly implement things to keep business going. And now what we're seeing in the new year is companies starting to look at this strategically. Are these implementations, or have these implementations been aligned with the strategic objectives of the company? Is this going to be a long-term solution? Can we find sustainable outcomes from these implementations? And they're really starting to look at digital transformation as a competitive advantage for the longer term. Digital transformation as a whole, I mean, it's organization-wide change. And this is a massive beast to take on for any organization. And so what we typically do is we help companies by breaking it into specific building blocks. We break down transformation into core areas that they can focus on and help them prioritize and look at which areas they can find returns quickly, which areas they can find the results that they're looking for as well. So within these 4 quadrants, we have using technology solutions for building customer experiences, digitizing products and services, looking to optimize or digitize or automate their internal business environment processes and operations, as well as upskilling their people, and finally looking at new revenue models or new business models for the digital age. Now, this is a very important critical element based on our experience, simply because what we've seen is many organizations do tend to fail at transformation. So if I take a research piece from Deloitte, failure rates in transformation projects have been between 60 to 70% since the 1970s. So organizations that have taken on transformation have continually failed on this. And from the Harvard Business Review, there was a research done in 2018 where 1.3 billion spent on of the 1.3 billion that was spent on transformation, about 900 million was actually wasted. So we do see companies try and fail at this. And so we try to create some kind of structure and approach around digital transformation that could be useful for them. I'm going to deep dive into each of these specific areas. But before that, I'd like to just share with you the first or the starting point for transformation that we usually take with organizations. We like to first understand where you are at as an organization before we try to define where you should go and what should you be implementing. And for this, we use a custom designed digital transformation assessment tool. And the tool basically addresses 6 different business dimensions, and it assesses what your digital maturity at the moment is and what your digital readiness for transformation is, as well as the biggest gaps in the different areas. So we use this as a starting point to help companies define where they're at, what they should prioritize, and what they should focus on. We also use this to identify the gaps in knowledge and gaps in understanding between the leadership teams and different functional units. So when we implement this, for example, we recently implemented it for an organization where 9 of their top executives, or the top level executives, completed the survey, and they were fully convinced that they were in alignment. They understood completely what needed to be implemented, where the gaps were, and how the organization was positioned for transformation. And the result looked something like this. None of them were in alignment. Everyone had a different view around where the company was and what the gap areas were and where they should be starting transformation. So this was actually a very interesting exercise. And this is undoubtedly, for any organization we try this on, we get a similar result, because it's very difficult to, it brings to light the differences in views and differences in opinions and understanding for what transformation is and what should be focused on by leadership teams. So this assessment is actually available for you free online if you want to try it out for your organization. I will share that with you after the presentation. So let's look at the 4 building blocks for digital transformation. We try to break it down first, looking at customer experience enabled by technology. And the focus here really is around developing your customer value proposition, understanding who your target audience is, what their preferences are, what their behavior patterns are, and how your products and services or brand can actually offer for those needs in the market. And the application of technology really does focus on creating frictionless, effortless, personalized experiences. And you want to leverage technology to really design interfaces that scale without exploding your investments and your efforts around building those interfaces. So the focus really is around value delivery. And I want to highlight one key element here. Technology implementation is great, but one of the key elements for success within consumer experience design and creating a value proposition that's truly working is bringing in your employees, the people on the ground, bringing their points of view in. Technology can only go as far as helping you make sense of data, but trying to understand why your consumers or why your customers behave in a certain way, only your employees can help you do that. And these are the employees who listen, who watch, who are on the ground and pay attention to why consumers do what they do. They can bring in this knowledge. And when we run the customer value proposition sessions or workshops, we like to bring in these employees from on the ground and combine them with people in internal positions. So we do basically 2 things. We bring in knowledge from on the ground knowledge from people who interact with customers into the organization, and we help to drive this consumer-centric thinking across the different functional areas to ensure that we trigger new ways of thinking around how consumers address the company and what they're looking for in terms of products and services. The second element is around product digitization, and here we have 3 ways of approaching it. So we could look at putting your existing product portfolio and services on digital channels, or creating new products and services that are designed specifically for the digital economy. And finally, creating new products and services that don't exist within your current business portfolio. And that could be even pivoting your business. And here we really want to focus on solving the real problems in the market, utilizing technology to really address what is the challenge in the market. With some examples here of companies that have done that really well over the last 1 year. Stage Kings, for example, is a company in New South Wales, and they basically build physical stages for festivals and events. And obviously during lockdown, they had zero income for their business. And so what they did was they looked at their internal capabilities and materials that they had, and they decided to look for a new market need that they could fill. And one massive need that came out of the pandemic environment was the work from home need, where people needed to have furnishings at home. And so they could use their existing capabilities and raw materials to build home furnishings for home office environments. And this was a new revenue stream that they created. ME Controls is another great example of that. They were able to, they're a company in Switzerland that basically produces snowblowers, and they were able to, with small tweaks to their products, reposition the snowblowers for industrial level in disinfectants. The third element or third building block is really looking at optimizing, automating, and upskilling. Here, the focus is really on upskilling and empowering your people so that they can be productive and they can engage from anywhere, anytime, and enabling new ways of working. There are some great examples of companies that have done this, but I want to highlight things around staff on demand. So companies that have been able to very successfully engage with their staff, even if they're at a remote, even if they're located remotely or virtually. And Valve Software is a great example of that. They have a remote virtual team that works in autonomous groups, and they have been successfully running the organization with this working model where people produce and develop games and send that into a central organization. So it's quite a nice model to look at. The second example, which I absolutely love, is Haier, which is a Chinese consumer electronics company. And around 10 years ago, they had about 80,000 employees, and the CEO decided to break up the organization into self-managing micro enterprises, basically autonomous teams that work together. And it's kind of like a beehive model where they have individual teams that produce what they need to produce independently, but engage collaboratively. Now, this has tripled their market capital over the last 10 years, so it's proven to be a very successful model. But what was very interesting was over the last 1 year, they were able to return back to full function very quickly. So by February 2020, the company was producing up to 95% of their products and services. They had gone back to normal operations fairly quickly. The final element I wanted to address is building block around business model transformation. And we work quite a lot with companies to try and define new areas, new revenue generation streams, and new models they can operate within the digital economy. And so the key element to remember here is technology can be disruptive, but technology cannot on its own disrupt an entire industry. To disrupt an entire industry, you really need the combination of value propositions for the market that leverage the capabilities of these new technologies. So you need to have this understanding for what the market need is, what the market needs is going to be in the future, and how these new technologies can cater for that market needs. And a great example of this is looking at a company called Naked Insurance, which is an insurance company disrupting the African market at the moment. They looked at the traditional insurance industry and how the market has shifted, the consumers have shifted towards looking for a increase in transparency and trust with their insurers, and looking for more personalization in terms of how they consume the insurance products. And they coupled that with the AI and cognitive capabilities as well as mobile capabilities and created a subscription model. So a new insurance company that is AI-based and develops basically or provides full control to the consumer in terms of how they consume the product, how they manage claims. And they've built into that as well a much broader purpose where additional funds in the company that's not been used by the organization then automatically gets dispersed to charities, charitable organizations. So people get this trust, transparency, and personalization that they're looking for. At the same time, they get full control of the business model, and they get a higher purpose that they can deliver for. So when we look at digital transformation, we try to address these 4 quadrants. We explore how organizations can deliver against these 4 quadrants with new technology solutions. And we try to prioritize where organizations should focus and what they should do over a certain time frame. So the thing to remember is over time, companies need to address all 4 of these blocks. And it's something that eventually you have to address all of them. Even if you start with one area, you have to eventually address all 4 areas. Now, the key element here really is around human-centered transformation. So without the people transformation, without people's buy-in to the transformation, we find that organizations are not going to be successful with any transformation. It can be a huge barrier and it can be a factor that breaks the initiative. Whatever strategy you design, at the end of the day, the people element is the element that either makes or breaks it. So fostering employee willingness to change and grow is a really key element around digital transformation. And that drives how the company is then perceived in the market, because your employees, the way your culture is defined, is what your customers are going to experience. So this is really crucial. And what we do is we try to describe the organization like the human body, right? So if your human body, if you introduce a virus or a foreign element into the human body, the natural reaction of the body is really to fight against this foreign element, to fight against this virus, and to push it out as much. It attacks the element and it pushes it out. In the very same way, any kind of change or transformation that comes into an existing organization, the organization culture, the people will fight against it and push it out. And we've seen this, it doesn't matter which industry, which region you're from, we've seen this happen in many organizations. So we try to address the innovation very much like how you would address the human body. Basically, we look at the DNA, the soul, the mind, and the body. And we look at transformation across all of these elements. And this is based on the human-centered transformation model by Profit. You know, it's quite a common model that you can actually look up, and we do utilize some of this, but within each of these quadrants, we have our own way of approaching transformation. So if you take an example of an organization that wants to implement innovation, innovation requires acceptance of failure and acceptance of a certain amount of risk. And if you have an organization culture that's very much centered around condemning people for mistakes or punishing employees for mistakes and risks, you're not going to be able to implement innovation in the organization. Same with Agile. So Agile is a core element around transformation or technology development. And if you have an organization where you need to get permission for every stage or approval for every stage from top management, and Agile requires teams, smaller teams, to be able to function in a very rapid way with a high amount of autonomous decision making, you're not going to be able to implement Agile development within an organization. So we need to take into consideration the current system, the current organizational environment, the current cultures, and start looking at defining, first of all, the DNA. Here we like to define this as a massive transformative purpose. So the DNA of the organization is really what is the destination of the organization, or what is the direction of travel, the purpose and the strategy. And this is not so much your mission and vision, but it's something bigger, right? What is the wider purpose of the company? What do you deliver to the market, to the world? It has to be something big and audacious, something that people can stand behind and believe in. What makes your employee wake up at 5:30 in the morning and come into the organization to do the work, to deliver what the customers need in order for them to, to be happy and to kind of focus on what they deliver to the market? This goes into the direction of a massive transformative purpose. And this massive transformative purpose is a concept that fits within exponential organizations. This is a book that you can actually look up. I'm happy to share the framework and the book with you after the presentation. And we're actually rewriting the book at the moment. I'm part of a crowdsourced group of people who is supporting the organization in rewriting this book and updating it. So that's massive transformative purpose is basically an overarching purpose. And a great example of that is, for example, TED Talks. Their massive transformative purpose is ideas worth sharing. Right? So it's something that's global, that's audacious, that's authentic, that people can believe in, and they understand why the transformation needs to happen and how this transformation delivers to this wider purpose. The soul of the organization looks at values, rituals, and behaviors. So day-to-day things that people do within the organization that you can change to ignite this belief in change, right? A key element of that could be leadership teams leading by example. Or it could also be, for example, daily behaviors that are rewarded. So change in behaviors that could be rewarded. The second two elements, or the mind and body elements, are probably something companies are more comfortable addressing. So mind focuses on training and skill building and so on, which many companies do focus on upskilling the employees or transforming their kind of capabilities and talent base. And the body element looks at processes, governance, and roles and responsibilities, as well as how you measure change and how you measure success. So we need to have all of these 4 elements together in order to create a human-centered transformation within any organization. Let me leave you with one final quote as conclusion. Trying to implement digital transformation without considering the human aspect is like putting skates on an elephant. It can be dangerous. I'm paraphrasing Louis Gersner from his book, Who Says Elephant Can't Dance? It's a great book. He was the ex-CEO of IBM. And I think it's, in my experience, we had a very similar view. Any kind of transformation is not going to work unless we address the human aspect, the cultural aspect, and that includes people within the organization as well as people outside of the organization. If you're interested in any of the methodologies that we have, that I've presented, we have quite a range of case examples and methodologies, as well as the link to our maturity assessment. I'll be happy to share that with you and share with you how we take on transformation in organizations. I hope you enjoyed that presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Kamales, for your very interesting speech about digital transformation. For sure, also some things that I found very interesting to listen to. Myself, my background is in marketing, and your example that you also gave, like Prada, it took them 98 years to reach this $1 billion valuation, and now you have nowadays technological companies that do the same in 2-3 years. It sounds to me that we're moving into this more faster, this more volatile kind of economy, and it's all about speed and optimization of investments to then sell maybe for the highest price. You'd almost say we are actually moving into a completely different economy. And from also a marketing point of view, the digital channels right now are, of course, endless. The possibilities that we can do to reach our consumers, to engage with them. And that's also maybe my question to you is, from a marketing point of view and also from a consumer point of view, maybe even more, there's of course an overload of data and information coming towards us 24/7. First, I mean, 20 years ago, I needed to buy a magazine or switch on a television to hear something about a certain person. Right now, I can get information from anyone at any point in time, especially also brands who are, of course, now more and more specialized into targeting these consumers. However, the concentration span, and I think also the interest thereby is also decreasing. And how do you as a brand make sure that you get some long-lasting connection with consumers? As you said, something like Corona happens and all my consumers switch to a different brand because I wasn't able, for example, to ship to Europe when I produce in Malaysia, for example. It's what I'm trying to say is everything sounds or looks to be more faster, volatile, without any strong connection anymore to brands, maybe also also within organizations. I would almost think, like, to position yourself differently as a brand, you'd almost go offline to kind of have or generate a pure exclusivity, which is then a different kind of positioning.
I think I understand your question. I think what I would advise is probably something slightly different. You won't. So first, let me start with, yes, I agree that, with the digital space, with the accessibility we have and the number of channels and so on, it has become very crowded. It has become a little bit harder for companies to stand out. So it's not so much just about having the budget for marketing. It's not so much just about, in the past, you could pay the big money for television, for example, or radio advertisements and stand out in the market, or the big billboards on the street. Whereas now you have a channel that has high consumption, social media, for example, online platforms and so on. And it's becoming a lot harder to stand out on these channels. I wouldn't advise companies to kind of go in the opposite direction and prioritize physical. But what I would advise companies to do is to focus on what your value proposition in the market is. So really trying to understand who your consumer base are and what they do on these channels, what their needs are, and which channels they exist on. So there's kind of a holy trinity for engaging with the customers, really first looking at your target audience, who they are, and exploring in depth. And the advantage of these channels is you get access to the data. So much data is available today to really deep dive almost on a individual level granularity around consumers. And the second element is really around content, right? Looking at what kind of content these people are interested in, what kind of content engages, what their customer journey is, and where at which point you can start engaging with them. And the third element is really which channels they exist on. There are so many channels today available, and recently Clubhouse was a channel that went viral. But I think what companies need to do is take a step back and pick and choose which channels they should exist on and where they can put out this authentic voice for themselves. And here, having this kind of DNA approach, the massive transformative purpose, looking at what's your purpose in the market and what you're trying to resolve. And this goes beyond marketing. It goes to a much higher purpose for the company to exist. And you can put out messages on those channels that really engage with consumers based on that DNA. So really prioritizing authenticity, prioritizing your voice and your culture as an organization, and focusing on identifying what the consumer needs are and how your brand is actually delivering to those needs.
Thank you, very clear. We also received a question from Rick Slettenhaar, which I'm going to read to you. His question is, could you differentiate the developments you describe per region globally? So for instance, how would less developed markets be impacted? And when the radical innovations you describe become the new technological paradigm, could newcomer companies in less developed markets leapfrog ahead of formerly leading firms in mature markets?
So this is actually a great question. What we've seen are, we've worked in developed regions like Switzerland and Europe as a whole. We've worked as well in fast developing regions like in Southeast Asia and of course in the African region as well. And they're all very exciting. So within the African region, for example, you have basic challenges across the entire African region. There's less than 29% connectivity to the internet. Whereas in Europe, we have over 90%, right? So this is a massive, significant change in terms of just access to the internet. But we do have companies in Africa that are leaping over some of these technology elements and going straight into, they don't have landline phones, they've gone straight into smartphones, and some people have 2 smartphones. And so this kind of leapfrogging that we're seeing is massive in some parts of Africa. So I think they will become competitive elements for European providers, especially if you look at financial services. Some of the offerings there are really consumer-centric. They really leverage mobile technology, whereas they could eventually enter the European market and be a massive competition. So I think it really depends on how the organizations are taking advantage of what capabilities are existing to them. Whereas we do have, within the European market, some challenger banks that are coming up, some challenger mobile-based banks, investment platforms that are quite active. And so we're seeing some of these things really develop at a rapid pace. For me, it really depends on one of the clients that we're working with is really low in digital maturity, for example. They just implemented their very first mobile app to engage with consumers, right? So they are really at a point where basic digital maturity is maybe at level 1. And so these companies, they're open to more, they have a bigger appetite for transformation, a bigger appetite for implementation of new technologies, but they have bigger challenges when it comes to the people side, so capabilities, the knowledge base that they have within the organization. With European companies that we've worked with, they have very similar challenges with the people side, but it's not so much in terms of capabilities. Here we have a lot of capabilities, but we have resistance because of fear of change. So we do see the kind of pros and cons and the challenges that exist across the different regions. And I think the digital maturity plays a big part, which is why all of our engagements, we start off with understanding where this company is today first, and then we start defining where they should get to. I hope that answered the question.
I think so. It sounds so to me. Thank you so much, Kamales. I have one last question for you. It's coming from Sebastian Mombers, and his question is, what do you prefer, SAFe or Scrum?
Sorry, I didn't hear the first part.
What do you prefer, SAFe or Scrum?
So I don't practice either. I focus on the strategic elements, but my team members practice Scrum. So I think they would have a preference for Scrum.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you so much for your speech and your answers to the questions that we had. And yes, thank you so much.